Hello, everybody, and welcome to the weird world of knowing. I want to welcome today a gentleman called David Bramwell, who I met last year. And David is, do you want to introduce yourself, David? I was going to, but I think it's probably better if you tell us a little bit about yourself, because you're a pretty interesting guy, aren't you?
It's very, very nice of you to say. In terms of work and projects over the years, I've dabbled in many things. I've been a BBC presenter and broadcaster freelance for many years. Made lots of programs that I've had the absolute joy to be part of, ranging from subjects such as clapping and time travel to murmurations of starlings and public speaking. I make podcasts, and I'm in the process of making series 2 of a podcast called Adventures in Nutopia, and that is exploring future thinking. And it's also how we met, because I'm making a program about the idea of the field of consciousness and about the history of weird. And so we met at the Weird Conference in October. And I'm a writer, musician, and performer as well. I do monologues and performances and shows, and all of those kind of link up, or I try to get those all to link up, because it's always good to try and rehash something you've already done.
Gosh, you're so right. It really is. But I think I spent quite a lot of time we got on, really, I believe, because our paths have crossed over in the TV radio world, because my background in my 20s was television. And when I found out that you not only did podcasts, but you've also worked for the BBC and radio, we had several conversations about that. But it does open up this whole new world of creativity and people who live their life through being creative, and there are no real barriers there. And it was a real shock for me when I came out of that environment to go into what we call the real world. I'm not quite sure if it is real, and discovered how restrictive the boundaries were of going into school environments and into small organizations, where I think the red tape and the bureaucracy and the dogma of the situations that they find themselves in didn't lend itself to creativity. And for me, that creativity, and I think that's the same for you, is really what drives us forward.
Absolutely. I was all throughout my 20s and 30s. I was, or for most of those years, I was a part-time music teacher in a school here in Brighton. And I started off in my mid-20s teaching a day and a half a week, and it was the perfect working week for me. That was just the right length. The weekend started Tuesday lunchtime, and allowed me to really knuckle down to my passions and projects, which were, as I've already stated. And over the years, the hours kind of crept up because I had to live. But I'd always and still continue to choose time over earnings. So I've lived on the breadline for much of my life, and now as a freelancer, I scrape a living, as most of us do. But when my teaching hours crept up to 3 days a week, it just suddenly started feeling like, actually, this is too much like this is what I do and how I might define myself. And also I did it for 20 years and I got tired of it. So I made the leap into the unknown about 6-7 years ago. And ironically, I've never earned so much in my life as I've since then. And it was really liberating. I really loved teaching. I love working with kids, and I love teaching music, and music's a real passion that still burns inside me. But as you say, the system is so restricted, and this whole thing of targets and objectives just absolutely, it's so tilting on the imagination and creativity. And I found that my lessons had to be mechanized, for want of a better word, in terms of, so that they could be judged and measured appropriately. So you can measure the success of a child in a class playing 5 notes on a keyboard with 5 fingers, and that they can name those notes C, D, E, F, G, and play them up and down again. To witness 32 children do that one after another is incredibly boring for you and boring for the kids. But unless every child does that, then the person with the clipboard will fail the lesson, because they haven't seen an example of learning taking place with every child. I mean, and it got ridiculous where I had to have the children demonstrating that a learning process had happened during that lesson, and that learning can't be an emotional learning. It can't be to do with body intelligence, because that can't be measured. So, this is why Rishi Sunak, says let's teach maths. One of the reasons why let's teach maths up to the age of 18. It's not going to make us better human beings. It's not going to make for a better educated, creative your future generation. But it's damn sight easier to measure. Mathematics more than anything else. You can give somebody 100%. For a piece of coursework done in maths, but no other subject really do you get that 100%. It's and everything's measured. So many things are measured against mathematics, I think. Anyway, you got us off on a topic I wasn't expecting to discuss.
It's fine, but you brought us back. That's fine. But I think that's the beauty, in a way, of this joy of seeking that we're going to be talking about today. Is how we met at the Science and Consciousness event, where they are starting to measure different ways of consciousness, measuring different ways of achieving things, different ways of actually being able to sit in a meeting come the day and build on how that meeting is resonating with everybody, what actually happens in the room when that resonates. And I think people are going to be really blown away when they start to see the equipment, the innovation, the measurements that are going to be able to come out to allow people to be creative. So let's go now on to this joy of seeking that you are on, and you've been on for a very long time. It's led you to write a book, which I've just read, which is called The Cult of Water. I read it yesterday. It's quite a short read, but it's really beautiful. Oh, it's beautiful, David. I loved it.
Thank you. Well, it's been a long journey it's about the River Don, but let's meander like the river towards that story. So someone who's been a huge influence on me throughout my life, and someone I had the pleasure of meeting and sort of working with on a number of occasions, was a monologuist, performer, theatre director and comedian called Ken Campbell. And for a lot of people, the name won't be familiar. His eyebrows probably would be. And for those who know their old 70s sitcoms, he was best known for a cameo appearance in a Fawlty Towers episode, where Basil pretends to have forgotten the anniversary, the wedding anniversary. Sybil goes off in a huff, and their friends come to visit, and he pretends that his wife Sybil is ill upstairs. And has mumps or something, and Polly pretends to be her. And one of their friends was played by Ken Campbell, who had these huge bushy eyebrows and says Sybil Manuel. And Ken, I was introduced to Ken when I was doing my teaching course, and he did a monologue called Pig Spurt, and it was 2.5 hours in length, and it was just him on stage as raconteur, telling these stories which were clearly fact and fiction woven together, but I could not differentiate one from the other. I couldn't tell where the truth ended and the tall tales started. And I loved this weaving of fact and fiction. And I thought, my God, to hold an audience enthralled for that amount of time with no props, just with stories, not traditional old-fashioned stories, but contemporary storytelling, I was greatly inspired. And some of the things that he brought philosophy to his performances. He talked about the philosopher Robert Anton Wilson, American counterculture philosopher, wrote lots and lots of books. And the key thrust of Wilson's work was don't believe in anything. Now, belief is the death of intelligence. Yes. But suppose in anything. And in other words, keep your mind open to things, but don't get too attached to something as a certainty. And you can be so playful with life if you keep yourself open to it. You don't become one of those sort of cynical individuals that thinks we're all doomed, or hates anyone who talks about God and hates spirituality. And I encounter so much of this amongst friendship groups and peers, etc. And Ken's attitude to life was be playful. See life partly as a playground and a place to be entertained and in wonder and enchantment. And the work that he put out in the world certainly was. This is a man who put on the world's longest play, the 24-hour long play called The Warp, and always brought mischief to his work. So I was inspired by Ken. And Ken used to introduce his shows by saying, "Good evening, seekers." and I like this idea. I like the idea of being a seeker. And I realized that like him, I had a similar path in life, a similar curiosity. And so throughout my 3 decades living in Brighton, I did every alternative course that I could find. I joined a cult, for want of a better word. I joined a clandestine cabal for 3 years, and during those, I had a great time for much of it. We learned about Gurdjieff, we learned about Kabbalah, lucid dreaming, tantra. Most of it I've forgotten, but we also started taking ayahuasca. So it was my introduction to psychedelics came through this group who were called the Revolutionary Gnostic Shamans of the Light.
Oh my word!
I know. It trips off the tongue, isn't it? And so in about 2001, I think it was, over 20 years ago, we were drinking ayahuasca with 2 Colombian shaman down in Dorset on a regular basis every 2 weeks. And that really...
What's the effects of that, David? Every 2 weeks? I mean, I know people who go away and they do ayahuasca, but they're doing that maybe every so many years. You're doing it every couple of weeks?
Well, I mean, many of the group continued for years to do it for every 2 weeks. I did it for about 6 or 7 times, and then decided that I needed a break from it. It was it's not a recreational experience.
No.
I think for most people. I mean, I think with magic mushrooms, you can take small handfuls and spend the night giggling away. But with ayahuasca, particularly in a ceremonial setting, it's a very you can be confronted with the skeletons in your closet. You can be directly spoken to by the spirits of the plants. I experienced telepathy the first time that I took it, whether that was within the confines of the experience or with the wider world. I don't really know. I don't really care really much, but I experienced it. And on one occasion I traveled through the universe, which was exhilarating and terrifying. Yeah. And again, I don't know whether that was just within my own, well, we're talking about the field of consciousness, aren't we?
It's your own reality, isn't it? That was your reality at the time.
That was my reality.
And you remember it as that. So I think the reality for me really does come to very much an individual experience. And I know that is what they are delving into at Northampton University, really, isn't it? And down at Greenwich with David Luke. They are investigating psychedelics at a huge level, and I know that the results that they're finding there are really quite phenomenal. I will put a link in, everybody, for people who are interested in more in psychedelics and the science behind it, to any of David Luke's books, etc. So you can look up the facts and figures about what is actually happening behind magic mushrooms, LSD, DMT, and is that
Iboga? Is it Iboga?
I'm not sure. Anyway, but I'll put that link in as also for David Luke, so that the listeners have a reference to go.
Yeah, and there's a conference as well. There's a Breaking Convention, is the psychedelic conference, which I think is being held at Exeter University this year over the weekend. Yeah. So shall I carry on with the?
Carry on, please. Carry on.
I left the group. I became disillusioned with some of the dogma that I started to experience, not least a homophobia, which had been kind of kept from me, but as it sort of revealed its ugly head, I found that the group wasn't entirely to my liking, and some of the associations with a Colombian mystical school where they had taken many of their teachings, I realized that it was time to part company. And also it helped me consolidate what was important in terms of the idea of seeking, the idea of this great connection between between each other, between ourselves. And I realized that one of the most profound and simple ideas I've come across was in my 20s. I found a book in a charity shop by the writer Edward de Bono, who's best known for his work with lateral thinking, and back in the 60s. And he wrote a book called The Positive Revolution in the 80s, and it was a yellow book on yellow paper. And the whole book can be summed up in one sentence. You don't need to read it, but he opens the book with his own maxim: in a positive revolution, there is no enemy. And I thought that's such a wonderfully profound and simple way of cutting through so much of the bullshit.
So much.
Isn't it? I mean, and I thought,
because I've been working with some clients today, and You know, we're constantly going through the stories and the events of what is going on in their life, and that is huge and that is massive for most people. But actually, when we cut through the stories and we just go through to how are you feeling right now? Where is it? What can we do about it? And we can change that and literally dial it round to a positive. They suddenly realize that story doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
It's really, really profound.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, loving that. Carry on.
And thank you. So I after this I took a year out of life, really. I came out of a relationship breakup, and I spent a year visiting alternative communities around Europe and America, and wrote a book as a consequence of that called the No9 Bus to Utopia. And one of the most profound things that came out of my experiences of visiting communities, firstly, that sense of the shared agenda of being in a community, how much happier people seemed in places like that, because firstly they'd chosen to be there. You know, they were living in an environment which was their choice, not sort of forced upon them. But also that shared goal, that shared sense of meaning that gave cohesion to people, and you know, a mythology and a narrative which often associated places as well, which gave an extra dimension to living. So that had a great effect upon me, and a realization that community is so important. And another phrase that I came across from someone living in Findhorn spiritual community up in Scotland was, there is hope in people, not systems or governments, simply in people. So, you know, this combined idea of having no enemy and having really no great faith in any fixed system, particularly political systems, but just having hope and faith in a more of a sort of a grassroots approach to life. So those two things helped kind of, when I first went to university, I grew up in Doncaster, where there were no bookshops. I mean, Doncaster populate there were no bookshops. Doncaster is now a city. Doncaster's population is I think it's about 400,000. Up until 2008, no bookshops. So when I grew up there as a kid, I wasn't exposed to many books. And other than at school, my parents weren't readers, and none of the family were or are really. And so it wasn't until I went to Coventry Poly as a student that I found a secondhand bookshop. Well, I found lots of bookshops in Coventry, but a secondhand bookshop, and these sections of the bookshop with subjects like psychology and the occult, you know, and Eastern mysticism. And I was just drawn to this stuff. So I was reading books by Rudolf Steiner and Madame Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley. And at the time, I was very drawn to that because it was all new and it was exotic, and it was you know, there was the seeker in me had been instigated. But then as I got older, I just came to realize there was just so much crap and so much ego associated with, you know, these individuals, Gurdjieff, not so much Blavatsky, but you know, kind of Gurdjieff and Crowley, that I lost interest in that. You know, there's just too much baggage. And it was, you know, as I say, really helped trying to define the things that were important to me in terms of compassion, collectivism, you know, community, having no enemy. And in more recent years, the group that I've gravitated towards, that's given me a lot of joy, has been the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So as a seeker, I found myself gravitating towards a druidic group whose values seem to be ecology, they seem to be community, creativity, and ritual. And I can't find any dogma in the group, and I love the people that I'm connected with. And it was performing the Cult of Water. So the book you mentioned near the beginning, it was performing that in Glastonbury Town Hall to the Druids back in the winter of 2019, and realizing I'd found my people when the audience response was overwhelming to this. So it was, partly led me to the last thing that I came to create as a book and as a performance and a piece of music is the journey down the River Don. Having grown up in Doncaster, we abused our industrial rivers so much over the decades and over the centuries that growing up in the 70s with a family who liked to walk,
Yeah.
We never went anywhere near the River Don because it was so heavily polluted. It was declared biologically dead up until the 80s.
Well,
And
many of the rivers were, weren't they?
well, they
There
were.
was so much sewage.
We
Oh, yeah.
we abuse them because
Yeah.
we continue to, and this cuts to the heart, I think, of the things that matter to so many of us now, which is about living in harmony with the world around us. So I decided to go and spend some time with the River Don and learn the story of the river and learn about the goddess who gave her name to the river, which is Danu, and to walk the River Don from my parents' house all the way back to the source in the Pennines, and to tell the story of that river through the narratives of industry, through the narratives of patriarchy, through mythology, and through ritual and pilgrimage as a multi-layered story. And the conclusion that I always come back to now really is what can we learn from our indigenous ancestors in terms of living with the natural world, and that what we do to the natural world we do to ourselves, because we're so detached from nature as a species now, or certainly in the West, in
And I think
industrial
you've
life.
captured it beautifully as well, David, because, everything that you were saying about Ken Campbell, feels like you've incorporated all of that within The Cult of Water, and if that is your little tribute back to him, then I think you've nailed that really, because it's
Thank you.
a stunningly beautiful read and very, very powerful in its message.
Thank you.
Very powerful in its message. I absolutely loved it. So I'd certainly recommend getting that either downloaded or get yourself the paperback or whatever, folks. It's a beautiful read and well worth investing in. Well, David, honestly, that's such a concise, you can tell he does podcasting, can't you, folks? And he does radio, because he's very concise, very not like me who waffles on a little bit.
Well, I'm a waffler as well.
I'm still learning at all this podcasting thing.
You're very good. You're really good at it.
That's because I'm letting you do all the talking. But no, absolutely beautiful, David. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. I'm sure people have got an awful lot of value from everything that you've said. But before we go, can you give me an insight into the most weird world of knowing that you have experienced?
It probably would be my experiences with ayahuasca, I suppose.
Is that because it is so much more dramatic than the gentle ways of going into spirituality and meditation? And
yeah,
yeah,
there's nothing.
I've never done any psychedelics. Well,
There's nothing gentle about it at all. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
I've never. I would never. I think it would be too much to if you were to have that you can take DMT in a form. I mean, you can smoke it, but there are other ways of taking it. Maybe it's done as an injection. The research that's been done by David Luke and his extended team at Imperial, they're giving people shots of DMT which last for 15 minutes and are instantaneous. You are blasted into a psychedelic realm. He says, within a second.
Well, I think he described it, or as people described it, as literally being hit in the back of the head by God.
Which is great. And
which is like, wow, okay.
Yeah, you get a 1 hour sort of coming up with drinking ayahuasca in the more traditional way, but it's also purgative. So I really don't enjoy being sick, and I had to kind of get over the vomiting before the experience. But I suppose it's, for so many people, look at what happened to Timothy Leary and I can't remember the other guy's name. It was who became Ram Dass. The pair of them were doing those experiments with LSD, and both of those men went on extraordinary journeys and incredibly different journeys in life from experimenting. It all began with experimenting with LSD, and we know all the downsides and all the dangers around dabbling with psychedelics when it's done in an unsafe environment. Only a few years ago, very tragically, the pop star Nick Cave, who used to live in Brighton, his son took LSD and stumbled off the cliffs of Brighton, near to Brighton seafront at the age of 15. You know, these aren't things to be done lightly, and really not.
Oh gosh, no, these things are really not to be done lightly, and so many people are losing their lives through dabbling in any form of drugs whatsoever. People have to be extremely careful. What we're talking about is being in really safe environments.
Yeah.
Talking about being in, especially with David Luke's scientific realms of being in that research area of actually what is happening. Because when you are very intentional with these forms, then absolutely downloads of information that you get from that can be absolutely pinpointed to help solve certain issues, certain problems, and shift things quantum level in research and areas of moving innovation forward tenfold. And again, all that is in David Luke's book. But we have to be very, very careful here of making sure that people don't just go and try to get hold of ayahuasca or LSD or magic mushrooms or anything at all that is not done in a very safe environment. So please do not go and do that, people.
Absolutely. And the experiences I had were within a ritualistic and what felt like safe settings. And I think the two of the experiences that I had in terms to answer your earlier question was that sense of the dissolution between yourself and the other, between the subjective and the objective, between your own inner world and the outer world, which is such a common, it seems to be the most commonly reported mystical experience, whether done through drugs, through fasting, through meditation, through prayer, through whatever. It is that sense of that being broken down, that sense of one and the other being broken down. So very much having that experience on ayahuasca, and also the sense of everything being alive. You know, this, even the air, even the sense that the air around me was this sort of living, intelligent element, quantity thing, or whatever I don't know what word to use. So that sense that the conversation we were having before you started recording, probably since my late teens, I felt a dissatisfaction with the cosmology of monotheism as it was presented to me. That, you know, the idea of a wrathful God. Bill Hicks once kind of summed up the paradoxes and contradictions of Christianity as it was sold to him as a teenager, when he said so hell and damnation awaits anyone who questions God's infinite love and forgiveness. How does that work? You know, like, and you know, we all wrestle with that. But I also found the scientific, you know, what would be called a materialistic reductionist approach, I find that deeply problematic as well. And I really struggle with the arrogance and the certainty of people like Richard Dawkins. I mean, we are starting to come around to also recognize the limitations of you know, Dawkins' work with genes and the powerful nature of metaphors within science. You know, within all systems, but particularly within science. You know, if you go around saying that our genes are selfish, if you go around describing nature as being cutthroat and ruthless and competitive, is it any surprise that we would act that way? Because we're almost giving ourselves a license to. I mean, certainly neoliberalists and hardline capitalists will say, you know, the scientists tell us it's in our blood, it's in our genes, it's in our nature. So of course it's okay.
That's changing though, isn't it, David?
It is changing. It is changing
massively. And the joy of where we met at the Science and Consciousness event last year, where scientists are actually delving into consciousness at such a deep, beautiful level. And the people who are investigating this work, people like Lynn McTaggart, an investigative journalist from New York who has spent the past 30 years investigating people like Bruce Lipton, Brenda Dunn, Jodie Spencer's work, is now actually coming forth with her own work, her own intention programs. Because with that power of intention, that's actually where these shifts are actually starting to happen. And when we start to actually simplify everything that is out there, as you were talking, you know, about the yellow book, everything is simplified into sometimes just one sentence, a paragraph. And we don't need all these constant stories that we keep going into, but we like a story. It's great. It keeps us going. But actually, to evolve to that next stage of our journey, we just need to be creative. We just need to seek. We just need to keep coming back to that joy of seeking that you've been talking about.
And when things do seem, particularly individuals, there are certain individuals, you know, we don't need to name who they are, but there are people that can really wind us up, you know, and they tend to be rich white men. But somebody shared with me the other day a question that had been asked of the Dalai Lama, and I paraphrase here because this wouldn't have been the words that she used. But the Dalai Lama was asked why there's so many arseholes in the world, and his response was to thicken the plot, which
could be taken in so many ways.
Indeed, but it's like there's a playfulness to that. You know, we don't have to. I mean, life is hard and tough, and so many people suffer, and we you know, we don't want unnecessary suffering, and we do what we can to try and relieve that suffering. But at the same time, you know, if we let it get too much for us, then we suffer unnecessarily. And just that lightness, there's a lightness that can be taken with that, and I take that lightness, you know, because I think it's absolutely necessary. You know, I have to, you know, I say to I had a friend who a few years ago followed every single news story about Donald Trump when he was in power, and he obsessively talked about Donald Trump. And I said, you love him, don't you? You're greatly entertained because you know, like you're always reading. It's like, oh, he's such an arsehole, such an arsehole. And I said to him, if they make a film, which they will, or in fact they'll make lots of films. They'll make lots of films about Donald Trump. Will you go and see them? You know, particularly if they're comedies. And he said, damn right, I'll be the first one. I'll be there on the front row. And it's like, well, you know, so that you have something to thank that man for, because he is providing your future entertainment as well as your entertainment now.
Everybody gives us something that we need.
Exactly.
It might not be everything. And I think that's where the seeking may be a little bit too much. Perhaps we're seeking a little bit too much in one direction, and just broadening our horizons a little and taking in the air that has so much information, and taking in the water from the Don that has so much information and taking all of that and making it ours, uniquely yours, ours, mine, so that it means something really special to each and every one of us. And I think that's where our journeys then start to collide into the most beautiful, magical places, really.
Yeah.
Like this has today. So, David, I can't thank you enough. I've had a really beautiful time with you. Is there anything any little niche that you want to, you know, nugget that you want to leave us with before you go?
I can hopefully tie this together. Hopefully tie up all of these many threads together. So I'm currently working on the second series of Adventures in Utopia, and we met because I was at Broughton Sanctuary researching fields of consciousness and the way of the weird, the wisdom of the weird. Brian Bates, who sort of introduced us to that ancient word, and so I hope to tell the story. I hope that it won't be till springtime that the second series comes out, but I'll be telling the story of Brenda and Bob and the team, and looking more broadly at this theme, and some of the recordings of the experiments and activities that took place that week. So I hope that will be of interest to your listeners and viewers as well.
Oh gosh, I'm sure it will, because series 1 of The Weird World of Knowing was very much chats with Peter and with Jeff and Vasilius. So people do have a link back to series 1 and update before the spring, where you can listen to David's really in-depth look at what happened at the Science and Consciousness event last year, because it's really powerful, really beautiful, and you're going to be delighted to know that things are shifting forward for all of us, and the information that's coming out there is certainly worth delving into. So David, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been great.
Take care, and I'll see you very soon.
All right, bye-bye.